All right. Looks like a small group, but welcome today to NACD's Conservation Coffee, one of our bi-monthly offerings that we provide for members on behalf of the organization for specific learning opportunities about our activities, programmatic updates, etc. We're going to learn about NACD's policy process today, but before we jump in, to hear from Connor, who's on our government affairs team. We're going to go through a couple of updates. So first off, again, thank you to everyone that's joining. As a reminder, if you're with us today, please keep yourself muted so that we can make sure to have an enjoyable experience for all of those who are listening in. We will record the conservation coffee as well and put it up on our YouTube. So if there's anyone that you think can benefit from the information, please share widely. And we have the archive as well of the last year's worth of conservation coffees up on YouTube as well. So please feel free to share those out to people who may be interested. So before we jump in, I would like to give a few reminders and thank yous. First off, thank you to NACD's District and Partner Relations Committee who put the effort behind starting these conservation coffees. Basically as an opportunity just to learn, again, short snippets of information that may be beneficial for our conservation planning partnership and others throughout the agricultural and natural resources spaces. If you're a member of NACD, first off, thank you for your dues contributions. If you're a paying dues member, if you're a non-paying dues member, I forgot to mention Ariel Rivers, your Director of Membership Engagement. So please feel free to reach out at any time and we can have a conversation. We are in a new fiscal year now, so most of our programs are on a fiscal year basis, so please stay tuned to our weekly newsletter for any opportunities about various webinars, upcoming grant opportunities, etc. If you're awaiting your dues invoices as members, those are the envelopes are being stuffed as we speak in Washington, D.C., and those will go out likely tomorrow as well. And again, if you have any questions about your membership, please feel free to reach out at any point in time. One of our key membership services that we provide on behalf of our members is, of course, our government affairs work, our advocacy work, our policy work, etc., which is why we wanted to frame today's conversation around the work that NACD does in that space. We're going to go through a few other things before I pass it over to Connor. But first off, I just want to remind everybody that that is one of the services that we provide to members that is somewhat intangible, that it's a little bit more challenging to put a dollar value onto. So it is something that we provide for our members thanks to your dues. And I just want to emphasize that again, that we cannot do the government affairs work that we're going to learn about today without your dues contributions. I'd also like to celebrate any of our state board members and our executive board members that we may have on the call today. Those individuals help drive a lot of our strategy within the advocacy space as well as our government affairs space. And our state board members are those that are typically voting on the policy that Connor will talk about today that later will go into our policy work, or excuse me, our policy book. And those state board members are those that are helping drive a lot of our activities in general. So thank you to those individuals who are here today, as well as any who may watch this YouTube later. And if you are representing a district today, a conservation district, and you're perhaps unaware of who your state board member is or what that hierarchy looks like or how a person even becomes a state board member, please feel free to reach out to me and I can make sure we start having those connections or those conversations to connect you to that board member and help you understand NACD's work so that we can make sure that you feel represented within our membership space as well. So just two other quick things before we jump into the meat of our discussion today. First off, I'd like to, if you have not seen it yet, I'd like to remind everybody that we sent out an announcement for our annual meeting next year in February. Our 2025 annual meeting will take place in Salt Lake City. And I saw that Mike Larson is on the phone today. He is our board member from Utah, and he is helping to facilitate a lot of the discussion and activity around the agenda for that meeting. And registration is already open. So we're very much looking forward to seeing anyone who can join us in Salt Lake City next year. But I would also like to put in a plug for our breakout sessions too. We're still accepting proposals for our breakout sessions for the next week through October 16th. So please, if you have anything you'd like to share, a big program that you want to give updates on, or some sort of activity that you would like to pilot at our outreach activity, for example, at our annual meeting, we'd love to see your proposal. So please get that in sooner rather than later, and I'll make sure to link our annual meeting page within the chats. And then finally, our last announcement, if you're enthralled by this process and you're relatively new to NACD, but you want to learn more, please consider applying for our Next Generation Leadership Institute. We're accepting applications for that program still. Essentially, that is a training ground for district supervisors from individual conservation districts to move through a leadership program that focuses on the conservation space, advocacy, working with partners, et cetera. And it's a great opportunity to learn more about NACD and federal policy and partners, as well as get more immersed into the NACD family as well. And I'll also make sure to link that in the chat box. So with that said, thank you again, everyone, for being here and your attention. And I will pass it over to Connor for our discussion today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I'm definitely more of a coffee guy in the morning, but it's 3 p.m. today, so I brought my trusty Red Bull for the East Coast, which I hope is good enough. So for those who I haven't met, I'm Connor Simmons. I'm the Government Affairs Associate for NACD. I work with our director, Chris Young, in the DC office. A lot of my job throughout this part of the year involves the internal policy process, which is just about kicking off and is why I'm here to talk to y'all. So I'll start with some important dates and a brief overview. Then I'll talk about what happens actually at the annual meeting. And we'll finish off with what the government affairs team does with the policies that make it into the book after the meeting. So feel free to put any questions in the chat, and I'll circle back during the Q&A at the end, or just make a note if you want to ask me something at the end. So first, important dates and an overview. So as Ariel mentioned, new resolutions will be considered at our annual meeting on February 8th in Salt Lake City. So bylaw amendments are due December 13th, 2024. So December 13th for bylaw. The deadline for challenging sunsetting policies is November 15th, 2024. And the deadline for submitting new resolutions is December 31st, 2024. So those are the deadlines. We encourage members to submit early as possible, to let us review and maybe provide any necessary feedback, and give you guys some time to kind of communicate with us before the official process. So what are bylaws? There are self-regulating rules. They govern our NACD procedures. NACD Board of Director members, region boards, executive board, and state and territory associations of conservation districts may submit proposed bylaw amendments. They must include the date the amendment would become effective, and they must be sent to Jeremy Peters at nacdnet.org. I'll be putting a bunch of links in the chat at the end of this as well for some of the various forms and stuff I throw out. Next, the challenging sunsetting policies. So this is kind of a confusing process, but these are the policies set to sunset this year that you would like to see remain in the book. NACD board members are able to submit challenges to sunsetting policies. The challenges must state the specific sunsetting policy and provide a reason to retain. So if you see, we have a sheet that I'll also provide with all of our sunsetting policies. Board members can identify a policy they would like to see remain in the book, provide the reason, and that would make it challenged. A document containing all of the challenges will be sent to the NACD board in late November. If you want to see a resolution that's set to sunset, stay in the book, but with a minor edit or a little tweak, that's considered submitting a new resolution. So that will be going through the December 31st, 2024 deadline, and that will be following the new resolutions procedure. All the challenge sunsetting policies will be considered all as one in one big group. So usually they get passed just en bloc altogether. But if the voting members call for discussion of individual challenges, they can be polled and voted on individually. Challenges for this can be submitted on our form stack, which I will provide the link for at the end of our presentation. Quick note here, the Gov Affairs staff, we're going to be assisting the legislative committee in identifying important sunsetting resolutions to challenge. So Chris and I are going to get together, look at the sunsetting policies, identify ones that we think the legislative committee and NACD would like to see stay, and then bring it to the committee and they'll approve or deny. So most, if not all, of the relevant policies will remain through that process. If there are any specific policies that affect you and you notice them, we encourage you, of course, to participate in the process. But we also want to note that on our end, we're going to be doing a full review to make sure things don't slip through the cracks. And then submitting new resolutions, the big one. So our bylaws allow for state or territory associations, region boards, national foundation committees and subcommittees, and the executive board to submit new resolutions. There's kind of a confusing flow chart moving up that I'll also put in the chat that kind of describes how policy gets from the state level up and the kind of appropriate avenues to do so. And as in past years, the associations whose annual meetings are held in January 2025 after our annual meeting, they will be permitted to submit resolutions after the deadline. So for new resolutions, if you're thinking of submitting something new, there are 3 criteria that must be met. First one is, does it concern the conservation, development, or management of natural resources? Number 2, is it of national or significant regional scope? And number 3, does it propose new policy or alter existing policy? So those are kind of the content outside of merit, outside of people agree on it. If it doesn't meet those 3 criteria, it doesn't fit in the NACD policy book. There are also some form requirements, including the use of NACD supports or NACD does not support at the beginning to ensure our book is uniform. Government affairs team, one of our big roles this time of year is assisting in wordsmithing because we really want to maximize the potential of your resolution passing at the annual meeting. So we are happy to help make sure it meets the criteria and kind of help flesh out maybe some intent that would make a successful resolution. New resolutions can be submitted. We have another form stack link, which I'll put in, or you can just email them to Chris or I. And I will also put our emails at the end. So that's all the stuff that gets done before. We're now at the annual meeting. We're in Salt Lake City. Everything's great. So the resolutions that we received 30 days prior, we put them into this thing called a resolutions pad. And usually every year I've been here, we've had enough that we split it into A and B groups. And then NACD leadership and government affairs team, we work to split the resolution committee into groups based on like the geographic or maybe political relevance to the grouping of resolutions. So we try to put any maybe experts, someone who has a vested interest, usually the sponsoring entity, we try to include them in their relevant resolutions committee meeting. So if the committee, either A or B, passes a resolution unanimously and without any edits, they all say, this is perfect, we love it, no change. It's placed in this thing called the consent calendar, and that's voted, once again, en masse, all at once by the board of directors. They're examined for national regional relevance. So this is kind of what they're looking for. National regional relevance, any overlapping existing policies that might be in our book that already cover kind of the mission area that you're trying to address, and merit. This is where people talk about if they even really agree with the resolution. And then along with any other concerns committee members may raise. Resolutions that are edited by the resolutions committee. So they pass, even if they pass unanimously, if someone says, There should be a added word here, and then we'll all pass it unanimously. That does not go to the consent calendar. Those are going to be voted on individually by the board of directors. And before that happens, the submitting entity usually gives some comments to the group, explains their reasoning behind it, and often explains why the initial resolution committee, some of like the um, problems that arose in that, like why didn't it pass in there? So it's kind of a chance for everybody to examine and make sure that we all support, NACD supports what's getting added. Um, yeah, and then so board of director meeting, they pass the consent calendar, they pass or deny all the others. Now we're after the annual meeting. It's government affairs team time to lock down. So we take all of the policy book, the added resolutions, the resolutions that passed, those will remain for 5 years in our book. And then we remove the sunsets that were unchallenged. Once it's official NACD policy, once it's in our book, our committees can begin advocacy efforts with national support. Policies, so this has kind of been a point of interest. Policies are not generally specific committees. We don't sit and say like this committee gets this committee gets this. But mission overlap and meeting follow-ups are identified and raised by staff. So an example is an invasive species resolution would absolutely be raised at the invasive species meeting. But a more overarching policy resolution might stay within the government affairs agenda until a specific opportunity arises for a committee to engage. Oftentimes, the committee, especially when the committees introduce them themselves, they get right to work on it, just with NACD support. But there are also some resolutions that don't fit in those boxes. I thought this would be a good chance to note some recent policy wins, kind of the intangible stuff that Ariel was showing. Now that we look back, we actually have results, which is always great to see. So last year, the Climate and Water Subcommittee added groundwater to one of our policies that stated, quote, NACD supports increased funding for river gauging stations and groundwater monitoring wells across the U.S. So because of that and because of the addition of groundwater, we were able to meet staff and NACD leadership met with EPA, NRCS, Fish and Wildlife, Geological Survey, and BLM. And in those meetings, we voiced support for increased data collection specifically for groundwater. We've maintained this priority throughout the appropriations process. And through our advocacy, we saw additional funding for conservation operations in the Senate proposal. And anybody will tell you it's a fight to just maintain the amount of money you get, to have them not take it. So seeing an increase in the Senate proposal is a big deal. And we were overjoyed that that happened. And it is directly related to our advocacy. One other recent policy win, which I think this one policy kind of encapsulates the entire process. It's, quote, NACD opposes conservation leasing on BLM lands. This was from the Montana Association of Conservation Districts. So because of this policy, we submitted official comments on a conservation and landscape health rule. And in our letter, we identified several risks a proposed leasing system may pose to communities that rely on public lands for grazing and other activities. One of the reasons I love this one so much is that we were able to, through wordsmithing, kind of reduce the specificity. So the initial resolution was to do with this proposed rule, but because we kind of wordsmithed it, we were able to apply it to this rule, and it can also stay on our books for any other potential use if the same intention comes around in a differently named legislation. We can, because we identified the intention, we're able to extrapolate that out. So I think we did a great job with this one, and good results already. So last, I'd like to finish up with our current policy priorities, kind of help you guys on our end know what we're looking for and what we're working on. So right now, I'm sure you've heard this ad nauseum, but our top priority is passing a full farm bill this year with Inflation Reduction Act funding integrated into the baseline. This has been the largest ongoing debate for national conservation groups over the past 2 years. and we're actively involved with leadership and staff for both parties. Our current policy book allows us to work towards this goal through a lot of policies. I just picked why Control F, federal assistance, and 3B4, quote, NACD supports adequate state and federal assistance, both technical and monetary, to carry out the priorities of conservation districts and the Farm Bill programs. And that wasn't even in our Farm Bill section. I just found that first. So we can use that, gives us the leeway to advocate for increasing the baseline. Our other main priority we're focusing on right now is ensuring the conservation operations account remains fully funded throughout the yearly appropriations process. As I'm sure most of you know, they've kind of fallen into this trend of punting through continuing resolutions, and we understand that that makes it impossible for producers to plan long term, and also the hanging ramifications of a federal shutdown on NRCS and district offices is the effects would be disastrous. So our current policy book has allowed us to advocate for this through this is section 1A11. So this is one of the first ones. NACD, quote, NACD supports conservation technical assistance program funding to address the local conservation service needs. And I wanted to point out here that you may notice a pattern, and this is a note that our team wanted to end on. We really do feel well equipped by the policies that we currently have in place. We have yet to run into a priority area that we haven't been able to address due to our policy book. It was absolutely awesome, the participation we got last year. We had so many new and emerging issues were debated. But it's also important to remember that if a policy is accepted, it's going to be on the books for 5 years at a minimum. So by reducing how specific the language is and ensuring the national scope, we're able to tackle all sorts of conservation concerns that fall under the umbrella intended by the sponsoring entity. And we can also make sure that all policies make sense to be in place for years. We don't want somebody looking at our policy book in 4 years and have something that makes no sense because it's come and gone. Our current book is pushing 80 pages, and it's likely that most concerns are already addressed somewhere in it. We encourage you to look at the policy book. As Mark Masters said at our annual meeting, Control F is your friend. There's a lot of kind of the keywords. You can just Control F and see, and if you don't find something there, it's a good sign that we could talk about it as a resolutions committee. And also, if that I understand it's a daunting document for sure. So please feel free to reach out to Chris or I for information. Even if it's just a loose idea of a resolution, we can tell you how it's being addressed in the current book or how to maximize the potential of getting it passed. So that's all I got. I will send the links right now. I saw Ariel was putting a lot in there as I was mentioning
Yeah,
them.
absolutely, Connor. So I already included the brief descriptions of the resolutions process, the bylaw process, and the sunsetting, as well as the dates and the links for that, and a copy to the policy development one pager. I'd like to point out a few other resources to individuals as well. But before we do that, we have President Kim LaFleur on the line. I don't know if she's able to jump in, but President LaFleur, if you are able to, I just want to give you an opportunity to say hello to the members and maybe a few words about your engagement in policy process or whether or not you've enjoyed it, et cetera, throughout your time. And we'll give you about 2 seconds or 20 seconds. If you're not able to pop off, then we can move on, of course, as well. She didn't know I was going to call on her, so she might not be in a good position to do that. All right. we'll move on. President LaFleur, if you're able to pop off at any point, feel free to bring yourself off mute and join us when you can. So for those that are on the call as well, that are maybe newer to this information that Connor has been sharing, and especially for those that are watching this in YouTube, I want to point out where you can find more information because you will not have access to the chat. So first off, the best place to start is likely your region representative. If you don't know who that is, at a minimum, email info@nacdnet.org or myself, and we'll connect you to the right people. We, of course, have a lot of resources as well on our website, and it can be a bit of a navigational headache sometimes to find what you need on our website because of the amount of work we're doing for our members. So I want to point out where you can find some of our grassroots advocacy information, our policy information, etc. So if you're on NACD's website, you can go to this drop down where it says what we do. If you hit federal policy, it will bring up this page here that has issue papers, specific one-pagers focus on topics that might be relevant within a given year or time frame. Those are available for district use. If you're meeting with your own policy makers and you'd like to share information, those are a helpful tool. We also have information on our farm bill and regarding various press releases and things like that. We typically put out press releases when we have successes like those that Connor has shared previously. And then within this drop down, if you hover over federal policy, you'll see additional information, our Farm Bill webpage, our grassroots advocacy, again, those issues papers, and one other important event and deadline, so to speak, that Connor didn't get a chance to even talk about yet, and that's our spring fly-in, and that typically happens in March each year, and that's an opportunity for districts to come to Washington, D.C. together and celebrate the work of districts on Capitol Hill, and the government affairs team is essentially on hand to help with some of the important meetings that all of you may have during that time frame during spring fly-in. We normally announce the dates of those, around annual meeting time in February, if not earlier. But stay tuned if you would like to be involved in the spring fly-in. And then finally, for our YouTube listeners, I want to point out again, this is the document that Connor mentioned regarding our NACD policy development process. For those of you, again, that are newer to NACD, newer to the space, this is a really good briefer on everything that Connor just mentioned. So it discusses our background regarding NACD, a rough overview of how our policy is developed, that hierarchy that he mentioned of information flow and how it moves through the organization, as well as some key definitions, etc. So if you need access to this document, again, please feel free to reach out to staff and we'll make sure to get it to you. But I want to point out a key thing, especially for our member districts, both dues paying and non-dues paying. You are a key part of this policy process. Everything that Connor has mentioned that translates through our officer team, through our state board members, up through our policy book, and then essentially into real life actionable policy that is helpful to our districts, that comes from you as conservation districts specifically. But in order for us to be able to help you do the work that you need to do, we need to hear from you, of course. So make sure you're having conversations with your region reps, with your state board members, with the government affairs team, with all of us on staff, as well as our very dedicated volunteer leaders. That includes our state board members, as well as our exec board and our officer team. So with that, we are very much available to answer questions in the next minute. If we don't have any, Connor put his contact information in the chat box as well, and I can stick mine in there too. And we can give you a few minutes for questions if anyone has any.
Hi, I have a question.
Of course.
Sorry, I'll put my video on here. but I'm backlit. Um, my name is Rosalind Streeter. I'm a supervisor in Oldham County, Kentucky, and I am interested in NGLI.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm well. First, I looked at into it like about a month ago and thought I can't get in before the deadline. And then, so has the deadline been extended? Because I thought it was the end of last month.
It has been extended.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Um, I may or may not be interested this year.
The
uh,
the
If you haven't,
the NGLI DC fly-in is awesome. It is
okay.
once a year. It's one of my favorite days. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Well, I have a very full plate, and I'm trying to not be a yes person. So since I'd already sort of said, okay, well, maybe I'll think about that next year, and I literally put a note on my calendar for August of next year to look into this. But I have a board meeting next week, so maybe I will bring this up then. But I'm also going to be asking for permission for staff and me and maybe some other people to go to the national conference, even though it's literally on the other side of the country from us. So we'll see. But anyway, yeah, okay, thank you. That's
so
good news.
if you're not already signed up for our weekly newsletter, Rosalind, I highly encourage you do that
I
because
am. I'm. Yeah. Oh yeah.
okay,
I get
perfect.
everything. Yeah. I live and breathe conservation now. I'm like that's why I'm like I say no
That's
to
why we
everything.
left.
Yeah. I say no to everything that does not have to do with land and soil.
Perfect.
But
So I pasted Keith's email address in the chat box as well. He's currently managing the program. Feel free to shoot him an email and just, have a conversation with him. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. The new
okay, great.
deadline is October 14th. So definitely, have that conversation sooner rather than later with your board
Yeah.
and decide, have those conversations with yourself about time, of course, as well.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
that's the first thing. Yeah.
but then also stay tuned to our weekly newsletter. We will likely have a first timers scholarship for our annual meetings. So for board members who have never been to annual meeting before, there is one per state available for a total of 20. So it's a first come, first serve basis. But if you have interest and are not selected for NGLI, that's another avenue to get you to the annual meeting.
Well, I'm not a first timer, so
Oh, okay.
yeah, that would not qualify for me. But maybe my staff or another fellow board member. I'm trying to get us to be a little bit more engaged with on the
Excellent.
national side. So yeah.
Excellent.
Um,
And Steve Coleman in your state is an amazing resource as
yes,
well.
he is. Yeah. He is hounded me for some other things. So I'm sort of
Good.
like, I can't keep taking his phone call. He's going to commit me to everything, you know.
We love
Um,
to hear that.
yeah. So
You keep me
but
on my
anyway, but
toes
I will
too.
definitely reach out to Keith.
All right,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Of course. All right. Well, any other questions? And thank you, Rosalind, for bringing that up as well. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Connor, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for that participated live, and thank you to everyone who watched on YouTube. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Conservation Coffee in December. Take care,
Bye.
everyone.